All right, this is the first time that we've done a live session with the Burkean Conservative, and I'm really excited about this part of the project. My brother and I started doing the Burkean Conservative a little bit after college. We had both read the writings of a philosopher named Edmund Burke, and we decided that he was someone who was very important to us. I know for me, I had grown up conservative, and I went to a college that was left-leaning, and going through that, it really made me challenge my beliefs as a conservative. And what I found was that the writings of Edmund Burke were very important to me to be able to reconsider my beliefs, to examine some of the assumptions, and then to take another look at those beliefs and be stronger with them. So whenever I was having debates and things like that with liberals in college, going back to what Edmund Burke wrote really helped me examine those beliefs, be more confirmed in them, and then actually have good arguments to respond to that criticism with. So I went through college reading his stuff. It really helped me, and that's something that I wanted to share. And my brother did the same thing, and so we developed this website and the page and everything that you've seen on the Burkean Conservative with that in mind, with the belief that his writings were important, and that they could help people. If you are conservative, if you're looking for like more scholars and things like that who can help you with your beliefs, Burke can do that. And so we started this page really with that in mind, but not with a whole lot of money or anything like that, or really any sponsors. But now it's grown a lot. So we're up to, I think, 1.5 thousand followers. Sometimes we have polls and things like that where several thousand people jump in and get involved, and now we're having lots of comments and stuff like that on our page, which is really exciting. And for me, being able to manage that with him can be a little bit overwhelming. We get all these comments and things like that on the weekends, and we're trying to answer as much as we can. And we thought, you know what, having a live session maybe once a week or a couple times a month can really help us be able to answer your questions, try to spread the philosophy of Edmund Burke, because a lot of people don't know who he is. And then as things come up in the issues of the day, we can talk about them on here. Sometimes it's a little easier to be able to talk about it here, because a lot of times I'm typing out responses as best I can to someone, and then another person will ask the exact same thing, kind of challenge our beliefs on this or ask for our opinion on that. And being able to respond to both of them in this live session, I think, will help. I actually was against it for a little while because I really want our channel to be about Edmund Burke first. I don't want it to be about me or my brother or anybody else. And so it's articulating those beliefs. So really that's going to be the purpose of these live sessions, and we'll see if anybody enjoys it or has fun, that type of thing. I know that you'll be able to see this broadcast throughout the day, and then we'll try to do one every week. We're also looking to interview people. I think that's going to be really fun, especially authors who have written on Edmund Burke or are aware of his ideas. I think it'll really help people be able to see how he can be applied. So that's where the Burkean Conservative came from. That's why it means a lot to us, and we're really excited to see it grow. I could talk a lot about who Edmund Burke was. He was an 18th century philosopher and a statesman in England. He's somebody that authors in America have identified as the first great modern conservative. That was Russell Kirk, who saw that in Edmund Burke and said, you know what, a lot of the beliefs that he articulated are very important and applicable for the United States. And so he kind of traced many of the conservatives that we hold dear, people that you probably know, back to Edmund Burke and said, you know, John Adams and James Madison and American founders had very similar ideas to Edmund Burke and put a lot of his stuff into practice, all the way up to even more modern conservatives like Ronald Reagan or somebody like that could be traced back to him. And so that's where we look at the conservative movement, and we're able to see it and see the principles that Edmund Burke applied actually happening today, and seeing how those continue to work and continue to make our country prosperous as well as England. So that's who Burke was. I'd love to get into discussions with people to explain more about that and how certain conservatives can be measured. We get a lot of people on our channel asking our questions about Donald Trump and how does he measure up in terms of conservatism. Is he the epitome of a conservative? Is he not conservative? Where does he fall in that spectrum? And I think Edmund Burke can help us answer those questions. So that's something we look forward to getting, or we look forward to get into. But that being said, what I really want to focus on today are some of the comments that we've had. I mentioned before that we get people all the time sending us messages, asking for our opinions on things, and we even get people who are not conservative at all who jump onto this channel and take a look at it and get excited about it. So I want to go through some of those comments today, kind of answer your questions, things like that, and then that'll be about it. So the first one I want to look at is Tom Gibson. Tom's been on our channel for a while, and he wrote me a comment. I'm going to read it to you. He said, I'm not interested in nonsense. I like your site, though. It can foster some good discussions, opinions, although I admit I tend to be from the other side. I have an open mind. I hope your page continues to foster intelligent discussions. And then we went back and forth, and he said, thanks, my thoughts are very similar to yours. It's cliche, but we need more discussion and less name calling. And I think that that's pretty amazing coming from someone who's not even a conservative, probably doesn't know a whole lot about Edmund Burke or any of the things that we've talked about, and yet he's finding some value in our page. And I just want to say to someone like Tom that you're always welcome, and we love your substantive input. For us, I totally agree that we need more discussion about the ideas that are happening, not only within conservatism, but really across this country. A lot of times that the name calling really just gets people interested. You know, there's like silly names that people attach to politicians and things like that. There's headlines that you see in the media. But if that's all we have, if we don't actually have any substance, then, you know, we're not really changing or growing or anything like that. And so when someone who isn't conservative comes on this page like Tom, and then he says that to us, and he's looking for that intelligent discussion, and he's bringing an open mind, that's really what we want. We don't expect everybody who's on this page to fully agree with this, but as long as you have that kind of substance, then I think it's great to be on our page. So a couple other folks that we have here. Joshua Bailey wrote the other day, he said that communists are not people, and he wanted us to talk about that. He said, you cannot believe a system of government that has never worked in all of human history and only led to the death and destruction of every nation it's been tried in and still be human. You cannot take a look at a history book and read about the tens of millions of people who have been murdered by communism and think that's a great idea for America and still be considered a human being. You cannot murder children after they're born and still be considered a human being. Communism and socialism are the most evil systems of government you can perpetuate on a society. And so Joshua and I went back and forth a little bit yesterday talking about this. And here you see kind of a different perspective, is that he's very concerned about a particular system of government, and he's talking about all the death that's been associated with it, and he's wondering how can anyone still believe this and consider themselves to be human. And I think for Joshua, he's more concerned with people falling into that trap of communism than he is about calling someone out in particular. But it's kind of drawing what he says here when he talks about how communism can be dehumanizing. And Joshua and I talked about it, and I really think when it comes to this, looking at communism, it's a system of thought that really it tends to be ahistorical when you look at the people who follow it. So you see today we have people like Bernie Sanders or AOC who call themselves socialists, but they're not really attaching themselves to any of the history that's associated with communism and really not calling themselves communists to begin with. So they don't see themselves as linked to the past, and I think that can be a challenge for some people when they see some of the very similar names, socialism and communism, coming up. And so for him, he sees that as dehumanizing. But what I wanted to say to Joshua is I really asked him the question about what does it mean to be human? Do human beings always have goodness in their heart? Do they always epitomize goodness? And if that's not the case, if human beings are a mixture of good and evil, which is what Burke said, then someone who is communist is still a person. They're just a person who's following a belief that they could very well be dangerous. And so when you look at the ideology, I think that truly can very easily slip into an evil direction, and I think that's evident in history. I think socialism has that danger, but I wouldn't necessarily call everyone who follows it non-human or not people. I would say that there's someone who need to be shown the history of the belief in the system, and then to show how the similar direction could easily lead into that very dangerous, evil direction. So that's something we try to do here. We've got some products coming up. We're actually going to be interviewing some authors and things like that on socialism and communism, especially with Bernie Sanders leading in a lot of the polls, to be able to talk about that and be able to explain why it is a dangerous ideology. And we appreciate that from Joshua. We've got a couple other articles here that we'd like to bring your attention to if you haven't seen them already. The first one is, we put out a couple products on YouTube. One is about Andrew Yang. Andrew Yang just dropped out of the presidential race, and he was talking about his freedom dividend, which is essentially this stipend that everyone would get for being an American. And it was his idea that he brought to the Democratic primary and tried to publicize. And he got a little bit of traction. He got into the second tier, and some would consider right on the fringe of the first tier of the candidates. But unfortunately, he didn't see a path towards victory, and so he ended up dropping out after the primary just a few days ago. So we've got a video on YouTube that talks about that, and we really looked at the proposal of does the freedom dividend work? Could it work? And has it worked in several other countries? So if you haven't seen that, check it out on YouTube. That's a really great one that we've done, and I'll put the link in the comments here. And then secondly, should we leave the Middle East? That was the other video that we put out last week. And what we were looking at in this video was Donald Trump's policy overseas. So going back to one of the first things we brought up of, does the Trump administration use principles from Edmund Burke? Is it completely antithetical to what Edmund Burke would say, or is it to some degree in line with him? And when you look at what Donald Trump is doing overseas and what his administration is doing to cultivate trade relationships, especially in the Middle East, especially with countries like Saudi Arabia and Israel and the Emirates, and you see all of the economic growth and the gains that are being made through that. It's this other narrative that a lot of times the media doesn't press. The media is constantly talking about, well, you know, Donald Trump is insane, or he's crazy, or his administration is in complete chaos. They have no strategy for this. You saw that with what happened in Iran, where they thought we were going to World War III, and there was all this hysteria. He's lost his mind. He's going to react impulsively, and now we're going to be invading. And then the truth of it is very different, because there's a larger game at play. There's something more that he's trying to accomplish. And there actually is some strategy to it. And you see that in the Middle East when you see all these trade deals that have just popped up because Donald Trump has been negotiating them, and members of his administration have been following through to cultivate that partnership. That's not something that he's going to jeopardize lightly. And so when you saw him order the Soleimani strike, and you saw him authorize that use of military force, it was for a very specific reason, because this guy was all over the Middle East, disrupting those deals, killing Americans, that type of thing, which isn't the same thing as saying, hey, we're going to take on a very costly war with Iran, which I agree with all the critics would not be very good for our country, would be very dangerous. But Donald Trump is aware of that, and he knows all of the jobs, specifically in the United States, that have been created based upon a level of predictability and peace in the Middle East. And so jeopardizing that would be very dangerous. And then at the same time, all the investments that our country, or that our companies have, our American businesses over there in the Middle East, he knows that a lot of those investments would be lost if things got even more chaotic in the Middle East. And so he's not really trying to do that. And yet you have the media trying to predict that that's going to happen, and they think that we've lost, you know, our minds, and conservatives have not learned our own lessons in history. So our video on YouTube is about that. Highly recommend you check it out. Give us some feedback on that about what you think, because we analyzed all of the jobs, all of the economic growth that has happened in the past few years, country by country, on some of the leading relationships that the United States has. So check that out on YouTube. I think you'll enjoy it. Again, if you have comments on there. And then the last thing that I want to talk about today is an article. Like I said, our channel has grown in the past few months, and now we're starting to get, you know, 20 or 30 shares of our articles and a lot of comments. And so I want to talk about some of the articles that are most important that we review on our page and that people comment to us about, so that we can discuss them here and kind of give you our take. And this was from an author who said that after attending a Trump rally, I realized Democrats are not ready for 2020. So we posted this link, and she says that after being a Democrat for 20 years, her experience made her realize just how out of touch her party was with the country at large. And so this person is a Pete Buttigieg supporter, and she's going to a Trump rally just to see what's going on. And we go back to some of the hysteria or some of the stereotypes that people have overseas, liberals have regarding Trump supporters. And Carolyn's going in to investigate that. And in her article, she talks about what she experiences there, and she expects to see that Trump supporters are going to be racist, or they're going to be xenophobic, or that they're just going to hate liberals, and that's all there is to them. And what she actually finds is some self-awareness in this Trump rally, which I think is really interesting. She talks about how there's a lot of optimism at these rallies. You would think that, from her perspective, that you go to a Trump rally and all they do is hate on liberals, and all they do is talk about the country's ending, and liberals have caused it, or something like that. And yet she goes there and she sees that there's a lot of hope in these rallies. There is this belief that America is getting better, that there is some traction behind it, that there is a future, and people are not so much uniting around a hatred as they are a new future that is using principles that work. And she also sees some self-awareness from the Trump supporters, talking about how some of them have problems with his Twitter, or they don't like everything about him, and yet they're still supporting him despite all of that, because there are other aspects that he actually believes are good. And so that kind of self-awareness, I think, was shocking to her, to go to a Trump rally and to see that, and to see that people are not part of a cult, and that they actually do engage with each other. They do have differences of agreement, and that they're hopeful even in spite of that. And that, to me, that really speaks to me. I think that's very exciting, and that's what we want on this channel as well. Is we want people to be able to talk, to disagree. There are times where I think that the things that Donald Trump are doing are awesome, and they're exactly what we should be doing. And there are other times when I have a problem with him, and that kind of self-awareness is something that we should try to cultivate in each other. And it's the name calling, going back to Tom's comments. It's the name calling, or just people that jump on the page and they just throw out an insult and then they leave. That doesn't really help anything, as opposed to providing substance. Why do you believe what you believe? So that's what we want to cultivate with this channel. I think that goes back to Burke. A couple last things on him is that Burke was someone who lived in the 18th century, and as a member of English Parliament, he was one of the few British politicians who was against invading the United States, leading to the Revolutionary War. And he was someone who thought that was a bad idea, thought that the American people should be allowed to pursue their own independence if that's what they wanted, and that Britain should be allowed to cultivate an economic relationship with them, which would be great for both countries as they move forward. So a very pragmatic, sound, economic-minded policies, and I think you may see some of the parallels there with what Donald Trump's doing in the Middle East. And it also tended to be unpopular because there was so much anger over in England against the United States at the time, and people were mad the United States was moving in its own direction, making its own decisions, and they wanted to clamp down on it, which led to that, led to the American Revolution. I think if people had listened to Burke, they listened to his pragmatism and to the smart ideas that he had, it would have avoided a lot of loss of life, and ultimately it would have led to the current situation that we have now just much sooner and much easier. And so when you look at the fact that he was willing to take unpopular stands, you look at the fact that he was willing to continue debating his own countrymen even when many of them disagreed with him, and that he was willing to stand fast even as the country moved in a different direction. I think those are beliefs that are very near and dear to what conservatism is. You see those to various degrees applied by Donald Trump, and hopefully you continue to see them more throughout the country as people are inspired. And so when I read this stuff about Trump rallies, and I see people going to these events, and it's not a cult as the media a lot of times tries to portray it. It's a group of people who are hopeful for the future. They're debating each other on these issues. Sure, they have people they disagree with, just like Burke did. They have these debates against other systems of thought, but they continue to come together to be able to find common ground and to move forward. That's a lot different than a cult. That is some self-awareness. That is something to get behind. And so I'm excited to see it happening in our country. I want to use this platform to be able to talk about it. That's what we try to do in our videos. That's why we're trying to do in all of our posts that we do. So look forward to having these sessions every Friday. Jump on our YouTube, take a look at those videos that I mentioned, take a look at those articles that I just talked about. Send us any direct message that you like, and we'll be happy to address it on the next live session that we do. So thanks for your time, guys, and we'll see you next time.